Okay. Natural hazard disclosure. Last week we talked about the CAR form that should not be used because it requires the seller to complete the answers. It's terribly important to understand that with a natural hazard disclosure, there is no "I don't know" or "because I don't know I can answer no." With a natural hazard disclosure, a liability attaches to a wrong answer simply because it's a wrong answer, not because anybody suffers any damage. If it is incorrectly answered by the seller, and that is accepted, and later it is discovered that the seller made a wrong answer, the document can be handed into the court with a complaint, and the seller can be sued for damages even though nothing has gone wrong. So, a good idea to get this paid for by the seller if you can, by the buyer if the seller won't pay, by you and the other agent, and in the end, I do ask in all of our transactions in the offices for which I'm responsible, that the agent put in his share, we'll put in our share, and we will buy a natural hazard disclosure. We don't close 1 to 4 units without a natural hazard disclosure statement. The $125 is well worth the money. You can get one that simply addresses the 6 natural hazard disclosure questions. Special flood hazard area, area of potential flooding, very high fire hazard severity area, wildlands area, earthquake fault zone, seismic hazard. These are the 6 questions. Everything after that, except the explanation of how these work, are things that need to be disclosed but are not truly natural hazards. They've just accrued to this report over the years because here was somebody putting out a report, somebody read the maps, read the books, went all the way through them. It's important to remember here where it says signature transferor and then agents, that only the seller's agent signs this document. The buyer's agent is released from signing by the Code of Civil Procedures. You will still run into some brokers and some escrow holders who don't believe that.
But the seller and the buyer have to sign both,
The seller and the buyer sign,
but not the buyer's agent.
but not the buyer's agent. Now, if you turn the page, there's a receipt here for all of this. There's 50 pages here. And that the buyer's agent may sign. It says, I got a copy of this funny document. And that's perfectly okay. You're not agreeing to anything if you sign as the buyer's agent. And here you see the thing that it's listing, the natural hazard disclosure, and then all of these other disclosures under here that are not part of the NHD and which are critical.
Thank you.
Number 3, we're only on about page
3.
3.
Okay.
Yeah, page 3, Mark.
Much.
All of these things are not natural hazards, but they are included, and many of them are statutory disclosures. So if you get this thing under your belt for $125, even if you have to pay for it, you protected the seller, but mostly you protected yourself. And of course, you're protecting the buyer because now the buyer knows about these things. One of the things that this outfit, GeoAssurance does, is to describe each of these elements. And we come here now to page 5, natural hazard disclosures. There's the 6 questions and the 6 boxes checked. And then they say additional disclosures. A military ordnance location, no. Airport influence area, and it even names the airport, yes. An area possibly experience airport noise exceeding 65 decibels, no. A radon area, low, no test data available, yes, there's radon. And within 1 mile of an industrial property. Farmland area, no. California Energy Commission Climate Zone 9, subject to requirement, yes. So when you take a look over here at these various disclosures, as you go on through, you'll find that there is a description of what they mean. There are even local disclosures, county and city. This happens to be in Los Angeles County, and this happens to be Los Angeles County and Los Angeles City disclosure, although the property was located in Claremont that this was done for. So the Los Angeles City does not apply.
Yeah.
I think we've lost.
Where you lost?
Should be right.
Right here.
One
Okay,
more.
down in the lower right corner,
One
you
more.
should be on page 6.
Oh, six.
Two more, yeah, two more. There
There
you
you
go.
go.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so you have local flood zone, fire zone, fault zone, etc. And then when you turn the page, there's pictures of the maps. It's not in a seismic hazard liquefaction zone, but it is in a local earthquake fault zone and a local seismic hazard landslide zone. It's not in a commercial industrial zone, nor a very high fire hazard severity zone. We're on page 8 now. Area of potential flooding, yeah. If a dam breaks, you're in trouble. In this house, the whole area would appear to be flood zone.
Mhm.
And the airport vicinity area, they're within the noise footprint of the airport. Now, there follows some fairly interesting, fairly easily understood descriptions of all of these things. Natural hazard disclosures, special fire hazard, areas of potential flooding, each one of these things is explained so that the buyer looking at it can have some understanding of what it means. We had in the Claremont office just today, a buyer who didn't want to go and remove all of the contingencies because this came through and said it's in an area of radon. Well, they're required, if there's radon present, to report it. It was below the 4 microcuries that the law allows as safe and standard. She didn't understand that, so I told the agent, go back, you read the part about radon, have them read the part about radon. Oh yeah, the light went on. All of these, all the way through here, wherever there is a disclosure, we turn the page and there's radon, there is a discussion of what radon is and why it's important or why it is immaterial. Radon is a natural gas. It comes from decomposing uranium. It's the second leading cause of cancer in the United States. But it occurs in pockets. There are cities, small cities, in parts of Pennsylvania where the coal mines have been in operation for 2 centuries in some cases, where they've interrupted pockets where radon was stored. They've come up to the ground, very high levels of cancer in people and animals. We don't have that kind of concentration virtually anywhere in our market area. It's easily gotten rid of. You can go down to Home Depot and buy a kit to see if there's radon in the house. And all you do is just aerate the place, air it out. You can have, sometimes it accumulates in basements, they put in fans. There's a very, very low incidence of radon in Southern California. When you get out in the deserts where there may have been gold mining or they had to sink a lot of water wells over the years, there may be areas that are broken up. It's a very easy test to do. It's very inexpensive. You don't even have to get it done professionally. As I say, you can get a kit, set it up in the house, go away for 3 days, come back, and it'll tell you what it's like. Commercial industrial zone disclosures, military ordnance, talks about that. Oh, it's another thing the lady was worried about. It had a military ordnance, a military location, and the military location turned out to have been a veterans hospital for many years and is now a general hospital in the area. Not a problem, but it did say, yeah, it was a form of military. Notice of airport and vicinity, you should know that anyway, you should disclose that, that should be on your your AVID, your AVID, because you know if there's noise, you can tell. The general rule where it's a commercial airport is 2 miles in either direction from a runway, the takeoff and departure pattern, and the arrival and landing pattern. And then 1 mile on either side of that corridor. If there are 2 runways that cross, then you have to take a look at that too. But here it is, going to be disclosed here. Now, in California, and I don't know about, I would imagine it's true here, in California and Los Angeles County, there's a thing called the right to farm. And if you buy property and the guy a half a mile away is farming, tough. You better find out about it. And then, for almost a decade now, we've had a testing requirement for ducted furnaces. You're required to have your furnace tested when it's replaced or repaired. If it has a better than 15% loss of pressure between the blower and the exit, then you have to have it repaired. And this, generally speaking, is aimed at asbestos wrapped ducts. And most houses that were built before about, probably before 1965 had asbestos ducts from the heaters. It's very important to remember that. So that is something most people don't understand. They move in, they decide we'll get a new heater, and before the guy can go and do anything, he has to test the existing ducting. And they discovered that the old asbestos ducting cannot be repaired, it must be removed at considerable cost and replaced with new fiberglass ducting, and so people get unhappy. This discloses that possibility. And here are advisory disclosures. Molds advisory. Molds are everywhere, people are pretty well aware of them. Here's one that isn't afraid to call a registered sex offender database just what it is. We call it Megan's Law in our CAR forms. Methamphetamine, oil and gas wells. One of the things you don't really want to do is go online and look at where the abandoned oil and gas wells are in your part of the world, wherever you are in Southern California. There are thousands of them. Ask the people to discover that for themselves. High pressure pipeline advisory. I think it's fair to say that a good part of Southern California has somewhere a high pressure pipeline under it. It'll either be natural gas, which is the most common, or gasoline. And gasoline is really interesting when it goes. Natural gas has some advantages over gasoline. Generally speaking, in the immediate vicinity of the break, when an earth-moving equipment breaks a natural gas line, the gas concentration is so great that it won't burn. It can't be more than 14% right at the site. So you have people just working in there, digging and scratching and plugging it up and so on. As it gets out and the gas to air ratio changes, it can be a fire hazard. But interestingly, if it lights a peripheral fire, when it gets back to the point where the gas is greater than 14% of the volume of the atmosphere, it won't burn. But it's good to know about that. High pressure gasoline, on the other hand, when it goes, it goes. We've had 2 of those in the San Fernando Valley in the last 20 years. One was at the time of the earthquake in Northridge in 1994, and it broke a high pressure gasoline line. Fortunately, it broke in the street, but it erupted and it burned it was so hot that it caught nearby houses on fire. But it was 4 o'clock in the morning, nobody was near it, and from that particular incident, nobody was injured. The other occurred on a city street. Again, it occurred in the street. It doesn't mean that they're always running under the street, they don't. It occurred in the street, and somebody came out and saw it at the crack of dawn, called the fire department. The fellow knew what it was, he could smell it. Fire department surrounded the place, got everybody's burners and pilot lights and everything turned off, evacuated the area. There was not only no injury, there was no fire. So but they're there. When they say high pressure gasoline, we're talking about gasoline coming from the refineries in pipes that may be 70, 80 years old, coming down from Santa Barbara before the Second World War, certainly during the time of the Second World War, when we got more and more refinery capacity along the Central Coast. So those kinds of things are there, and they're growing old. Here's Los Angeles County disclosures. I'm quite sure you have the same kind of thing in Riverside and San Bernardino. Fault rupture hazard, liquefaction stuff. Tsunami is probably something you don't need to worry about. The ocean is far enough away so you probably won't feel a tsunami problem. And then they have asbestos hazard zones where asbestos appears in the natural rock. We have some city parks in Los Angeles that have asbestos in them. Right to farm, there's a county right to farm ordinance. Expansive soils. I think we've spoken about expansive soils in here before. It's where water moves in and the soil becomes so unstable and the water pressure is so great that it forces sand and particles up, and it pushes upward pressure on the surface. And if there is a slab over it, like a garage or a living room that is not a bearing area, it will sometimes cause it to break. Sometimes it breaks upward, sometimes it just crazes outward, sometimes you get a dislocation where part of the floor is above the other. There's an area in the northwest San Fernando Valley where I practiced in my early days, where it was so bad that we used to take a children's beach ball, a small one, along with our flashlight and our rulers and stuff, because in those days we had to measure the room size. And we'd put the ball in the center of the room and see which way it rolled. We'd put it at the corner of the room and see which way it rolled. And then we'd take off our shoes, because it was a whole development on this kind of soil, this expansive soil. We'd take off our shoes, and in our stocking feet, we'd go scuff, 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 until we could feel under the carpet, you could feel where the break was. And we'd have to report that. We don't do that quite so much as we used to. I'm not sure that at some point, since it is a known technique and very low tech, we're not going to be asked to why we didn't, but there you are. The city of Los Angeles, and I'm sure the city of Moreno Valley and the city of Riverside will have local disclosures. Methane, the city of Los Angeles has more sanitary landfill dumps than is really good. And of course, they generate methane. City of Glendale tapped it off, and has a small generator that supplies about 65 houses with all the power it needs from the methane generated by a very old city dump. So let's move over here to California Tax Disclosure Report. Now this may seem like a much ado about nothing, but those of you who were practicing here when prices were going up 20 and 30% a year had some pretty, well, good afternoon.
How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Here we are.
Thought I'd come spend a minute or two with you guys.
Well, it's nice of you to come along when you've got nothing else to do. This is section 3.
Sit here? Here. Right here.
I'm clubby and I did baby.
Oh, not all right, man.
We're in section 3 and we're over to a place called Property Tax Disclosure Report.
Oh, you're doing the natural hazard?
Yeah, doing the real natural hazard, the one that you want for your
Okay.
client. There we go.
Okay, great.
Yeah, table of
That's
contents.
it?
Right, okay.
Okay.
Now, I started to say, when you were here, if you were here in this business 10 years ago, people were buying houses. 8 years ago, they were buying houses. Property values going up 20% a year. And somebody would buy a house for $450,000, and the tax that was transferred to them was the tax of record at the time, and the person who had bought the house back in 1972 was paying under Prop 1, and maybe they were paying $1,000 or $1,500 a year, and the house had appreciated 4 times, so they paid $1,000, $1,500 a year. The house is taxed based on its current value, $4,000 a year. So the buyer, halfway through the year, would get a supplemental tax bill for the difference between what he paid in escrow for 50% or whatever percentage it was at $1,500 and $4,000. And they yelped and howled and carried on. And as a result, there's a rule, and we found it in the statewide buyer and seller, that says it must be in large type and you must explain it very carefully. Well, the SBSA probably does that adequately. This does it in detail, and you'd be surprised at the looks on agents' faces when they see what this really means. Pop over and take a look. We all know about Mello-Roos. We're not sure where it came from. We're not sure what a mellow is or a roos is, but we know a Mello-Roos when we see one. After the passage of Proposition 13, when you could no longer raise property taxes without a 2/3 vote of the public, they created a non-tax tax called a Mello-Roos Community Facilities District. What it amounts to is this: new construction carried with it, not as a requirement, but only as at the city's option or the county's option, a fee structure that was designed, at least in theory, to pay for some of the improvements that would attend the construction of new buildings, new developments, condos, freestanding buildings, the usual development. Mello was the assemblyman, I think, and Roos was the state senator. who put this together, and it was tested in the courts and was decided it wasn't a tax. And because it's not a tax, it's not deductible from your federal income tax, so you've got to pay it. And it rides with the property, and unlike bonded indebtedness, which we'll talk about in a minute, it cannot be prepaid. It may be $2,000 now a year, and there may be provisions at 10-year intervals or 5-year intervals for it to increase. It may wind up in its last 5 years being $3,000 a year. And so there is absolutely no way to discharge that through sale. You can't ask the seller to pay off the Melrose. Can't be done. If it's not there, rejoice. Some of the more inventive developers, particularly in this last decade, and they got burned in the 80s and 90s with Melrose, they would go down to City Hall and say, look, we're going to build 40 houses here. You're going to make $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 out of those over the course of the next 20 years, based on what you've told us per house per year. Here's the deal. You won't get $800,000, but we'll come in right now and give you $400,000, and you don't put Melrose on these houses. So they put $400,000 on the city treasurer's desk, and then they go out and they take $400,000 divided by 40 houses divided by 30 years and just add it to the price. But there's no Melrose. 1915 Bond Act assessment districts. Bonds are very interesting in California. Probably most people don't know the origin of the right of a community or a district, and we'll talk about districts, to issue bonds. Back in 1915, when the population of the state was about 3 million, there was an awful lot of highway and an awful lot of harbor and an awful lot of right-of-way that needed to be lighted or paved or developed or have something done with it. And so the legislature said, in effect, a jurisdiction, a city, a county, a special district, has the right to issue bonds and pay them back over some period of time. Cities may do it from the general revenue of the city. Bonded indebtedness for special things like municipal water districts must be paid from the revenue of the water district. And so we created this rather complex series of bonds that come out, and some of them are very interesting. The reason we disclose the Bond Act itself is because, in effect, that says that you and your neighbors may go to the poll and vote on any issue, and 50% plus one vote will put that issue into effect, and you will be paying on that. Now, if you come from Iowa, where bonds aren't common, it's kind of weird. The other thing that is weird about the Bond Act is it says special districts. Everybody says, well, what's a special district? I went to school, I learned that there's executive, there's judicial, there's legislative. Well, hold your hat, kids. In California, there are special districts. They're a blind, almost uncontrolled fourth branch of government. And they have the right, under certain circumstances, to issue bonds. Here's a description of one special annual assessment. This isn't bonded. This goes on forever. Los Angeles County Regional Park and Open Space District, $23.83. Authorized by the assessment districts. Assessment districts. The supplemental property tax we talked about at some length. Here's an explanation of it. Mandatory transfer fee disclosure required. That's the private transfer fee that the developers cleverly tacked on at the first part of the last decade. We'll sell your house. We'll sell you a house now for $400,000.
Yeah.
But when you sell it, you have to send $2,000 or $4,000 or a percent of the, whatever it is to someplace. They've tried to get rid of it in the courts, and they decided no, they can't get rid of it because it's a contractual obligation. The court will not interfere with a legal contract, so it's still there. So people are entitled to know that. the transfer tax, which is $1.10 per $1,000 in every county in the state. There are city transfer taxes that vary all over the place. The least expensive, I think, are places like Colton and Pomona, where it's $1.35. Los Angeles is a whopping $4.50. So when you sell a house in Los Angeles, you pay $5.65 for every $5.60, yeah, $1.10 plus $4.50. $5.60 for every $1,000 of transfer. It caught a few people by surprise. So all of that is in there, and here is the explanation of it. You're buying a house, you better know about it. Not all cities, in fact, most cities do not have a transfer tax. More thinking it might not be a bad
And
idea.
this is simply transfer tax, meaning the
It's like a sales tax on your house.
transferring one house from this lady to
That's
this
right.
lady.
Then this lady will
Paperwork
pay,
required.
this lady will pay $1.10 per thousand, unless she lives in Colton, in which case she'll pay $2.45 a thousand.
Mhm.
It's like a sales tax on your house. Description of the Bond Act, how it happened to get here, can the annual levy increase, etc. Then turn over here, I wish they'd numbered these pages. Oh, it is at the top, page 9. Breakdown of the 2010-2011 property tax bill for this particular property. Now remember, the tax is 1% of the last sold price compounded by 2% a year. That's the tax. For this particular property and this particular date, that was $2,232.55. But take a look down at the bottom here. The total tax bill is $2,902.99. $750.
Six total assessments.
Okay, but look at what they're for. A lighting maintenance district, $109. County sanitation, recreation assessment, trauma and emergency services, fire department special tax, flood control, regional park and open spaces, standby charges, district standby charges, mosquito abatement. These districts, mosquito abatement districts have been around since I was a kid in the 1930s. We had a mosquito abatement district. They had guys in those days that would go out with trucks, little old Ford trucks that had a tank, and you get in there, you go pump, 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 and you spray oil all over standing water. And there was a lot of it around here in those days because it was all open country. It was all orange groves or desert, take your choice. And the mosquito abatement district is still with us. Do they abate mosquitoes? Yeah. Now they get up in helicopters and fly around looking for green swimming pools. Oh, there's one, we're gonna go down and abate it. So, each one of these things carries an explanation. If you come from somewhere where you just have a flat rate property tax, and you don't know what all this, what it's spent for, this is a real eye-opener. In fact, people have lived in this area all their lives. Agents and brokers look at this and say, oh my God, I didn't know that. So you're stuck with this kind of strange phenomenon. But wait, there's more. Turn over to page, not 12, but the next one. Earthquake guide. Now, this is a summary, believe me. An earthquake guide is double-side printed and runs to about 50 pages. And like the natural hazard disclosure, it addresses many, many things that are not earthquake. Just as it doesn't, as you don't expect to find 50 pages of natural hazard, don't expect to find 60 pages of earthquake. They've got some great illustrations. Most of it is about earthquakes. They've got some good descriptions of what you're looking for, things that you need to do, sources of information. If you come from Kansas, and it doesn't bother you that you can look out the window and see your neighbor's house going past, you come to California, you're terrified about what? Earthquakes. In Kansas, every year, more people are killed by tornadoes than are killed in every earthquake we have. And you divide the earthquakes that we have here by about 19, because they come about every 19 years. Feel comfortable, the last major one was 18 years ago, so a year ago. All you have to worry about in California is that when this thing hits, your house holds up. And most of them do. A surprising number of them do. So here's a description of how they work and what people are looking for. State law requires a seller to, this is over on page 2 now, inform the buyer about home weakness, see earthquake weakness, strap the water heater, deliver a copy of this booklet if your home was built before 1960. Father's advice, deliver it to the buyer anyway, even the house was built 2 years ago. There's an awful lot of stuff in here. Say, this doesn't apply to this house, but I'd like you to have this information, would you sign a receipt for it? Because when you get through and run through the whole thing, you'd be amazed at how many disclosures are made that will protect you when you go to court. And remember, when we're protecting the seller and we're protecting the buyer, we're protecting ourselves. There's absolutely no excuse for not doing all you can. I think we discussed it last week, the seller property questionnaire, which is not required, but which we require in our offices, where I write letters. I write a letter, and then to the buyer saying they won't give us a seller property questionnaire, and then I send a letter and the memo to the broker saying, if you don't get us a seller property questionnaire, I'm sending this to my buyer, and the buyers have never seen the letter because they always get them. Well, this is the same kind of thing. If the house was built after 1960, it's not required. Don't ask the listing agent for it. They'll say, you idiot, the house was built in 1995. Well, I know that. Just take one of these. They're available. They come from, we get ours from, I think, Old Republic, Home Protection. Get them and just walk and talk them through it, particularly if you've got somebody out of state. How many of you ever handled a relocation from out of state? The company sends them out twice, once one weekend to know the neighborhood, kind of get to know where the schools are and that kind of thing, and the other weekend to come out and find a house. They tell you what they want, you drive them around, and then they come back and you've got this whole catalog thing. And of course the first time is, well, where's a ballet school, you know? Well, what about pot? Well, where's the soccer game? And what about divorce? And, you know, the whole thing, this orientation the first time out. And then, of course, the big thing. What about earthquakes? How do you know when an earthquake's coming? Answer, you don't. Well, we have warnings for tornadoes. Yeah, but that's because they're coming from somewhere. And going somewhere else, they're going to pass through you. Here, they're coming from down there, and we don't know what's going on there.
They're working on something for your mobile phone.
Yeah.
That it would let you know, what do you say,
Yeah, they've got a whole...
10 seconds or a minute or something?
Well,
before
they're
that.
working on a whole series of things like that, but we aren't there yet.
No, we're not.
If you are coming from out of state with a job transfer especially, and you have to be in California, and you have to be in Southern California, you read about these things and you understand that maybe it isn't quite so severe as you thought it was. I encourage you to get a full-blown earthquake book. Read through it. You'd be surprised how interesting it is.
They have it on disc format now, so you don't have to worry about it.
That's right, they do, but remember the problem with the disc format, if something changes, the disc doesn't.
I know.
Okay, then
You have
here's,
to get an updated version.
that's why as much as I like people being able to run zip forms off of their laptop wherever they are, if they're running off of their hard drive and they don't keep downloading it, they're in deep trouble. I'm in deep trouble. Here is a form that does give you, doesn't apply or don't know, but get this completed by yourself. If the house is after 1970, it doesn't matter, they don't have to do this. But before that, be sure that it's done. After 1970, just give the book to the buyer. And if you are the listing agent, say, I'm giving you this book, Miss Selling Agent, and asking you to just have the buyer acknowledge having received a copy of it. Well, the house was built before 1970, I understand, but there's a lot of disclosures in here that protect you, protect me. Get us a signature to show that this was given to your nice buyer. Not because there's going to be an earthquake, not because you want to scare them to death, but because there's so many things in here that talks about radon, it talks about a whole host of things that are good to know. Now, the last time we ran through this here, we did not do probate. And the reason we didn't do probate is because nobody really wanted it, it's kind of boring, and but unfortunately, we are now in a generation that's dying off. We talk a lot about trusts in the first part, listing a trust. Listing a trust is exactly the same as listing a house with an ordinary person, whether for short sale or an equity sale. But yeah, just one form. Probate goes back to the Old English common law. And the judge's intent and the judge's mission is to maximize the estate for the benefit of the heirs. We have had a long conflict in North Europe, and particularly in the Anglo-Saxon countries, about which is more important, human life or property. When you figure that we used to behead people for stealing a loaf of bread, it gives you some idea of where the sanctity of property notion came from. And at this point, we are still carrying forward the basic notion that the court sitting on this issue of an estate is going to try very hard to maximize the estate and minimize its costs. Before we talk about the listing agreement, let's just review the two things that can happen when you have a listing and then you get an offer. In most cases where there is a probate, you will have some kind of an executor name. And we don't call the women executrixes anymore, we call them executors. It's, you know, like, you know, the Oscars are given to male and female actors, not
That's right.
an actor and an actress.
That's right, yeah. Mhm,
Generally speaking, those will be people who are family members.
mhm.
And in most cases, again, because the court is sick and tired of doing this, it usually, you know, there's millions of people here now, and thousands die all the time. They got sick and tired of this. So they had the legislature create a thing called the Independent Administration of Estates Act. And it says, if Susie, daughter Susie, who's been named executrix, comes to court, and her big brother isn't standing there saying, I don't trust her, I don't want her to have anything to do with this, the court will say, you may have independent administration of the estate, and since the house is usually the largest thing, and you get the right to sell the house without ever going back to court again. Independent administration. If, on the other hand, Susie goes into court, and she's got 4 family members there who say, yeah, we want Susie, yeah, 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 and they're looking at this big guy in the corner, he says, I don't like her, she's never been fair to me, she's my half-sister, and I don't want it. The court will say, sorry, Susie, no independent administration. Whatever you do, you bring back to court, and the court will assume jurisdiction of it until a final disposition is made. You need to explain that to whoever is doing the probate listing, because it ain't gonna be the person who owned the property. They're gone. So if you're not dealing with an attorney, and most of the time you will not be, the administrator or the executor will be dealing with an attorney in all probability. But for the most part, you're gonna be dealing with, you know, the young engineer who's come back from Colorado for the week to settle mom's affairs and get the place listed and get the hell back to Colorado so he can earn a living. And you're gonna have this discussion with him. You can't get it yet unless you're very lucky, unless your attorney went and did something after mom died, but that's unlikely since she's only been dead a month. You need to consider a thing called independent administration of estate, and you need to talk to an attorney about it. Otherwise, the court will take jurisdiction, and the court will look at every move you make. Well, independent administration has worked so well that I can't see anybody really making a fuss about it any longer. But whoever it is needs to be thinking about it when you go through this form. Now here's something that comes as a surprise to many agents. When you read this exclusive right to sell, the court-appointed representative of the estate, no, the conservatorship, the guardianship. Oh my God, that's probate? Yep. When we think of probate, we think of dead people. And we think of a will, and we think of a very easy thing to do. Now, you do not need the court's approval to list any of these things. You need the court's approval to go ahead after it's listed and after you have offers. So what you want to do is to be very clear as you write this, unless they show you a document called a letter testamentary. Letters testamentary are issued to the executor or the administrator, and it says you have independent administration. If you do not have that in your site, then this sale, court confirmation is required. Or, if they have it, you just mark the box, may not be required, because you never know what the court's gonna do or who's gonna come in and how. If they have the letters testamentary, it may not be required. I've never seen it required where you had independent administration. I've never had an independent administration called back in a dispute. And you treat it in all other respects like an ordinary listing. You have your due diligence, you have your inspection, you have your avid, you have an obligation to create a sensible property value, just like you would for anything else. You know, a CMA or a broker price opinion, however you want to do it. Compensation is exactly the same as when we did it for an ordinary listing. You get a percent. Occasionally you'll get a flat dollar rate. Sometimes the court will say, we don't care what it sells for, we will only pay $5,000 in commission. Okay, maybe you want to do it, maybe you don't, but it's very rare. Normally you and the executor or administrator, incidentally, if you die without a will, the court will appoint an administrator, and the state of California will take a nice piece of your money. If you die with a will, and the executor is dead, and there's no successor executor, the court will appoint an administrator. And then it proceeds under the terms of the will. But whoever it is that's going to sign on the dotted line has got to have the authority to do so. The will creates the authority.
When the court appoints, is that someone unknown by the family, or is a family member usually?
It can go either way. In general, you know, you have one of these tragic things where dad and mom left oldest son to be the executor, and then they were all killed in the same car crash. And there was no alternative executor named in the event of his death or his inability to act. The court in general will go and ask the family, or ask the family lawyer, is there a family member who will do this? And in general, the court will grant that if they're competent people at all. They don't have to be. If the court doesn't like the look of things, if the accident that killed all three of them was kind of suspicious, they'll appoint an outside administrator. And in the event of dying intestate, where you die with no will, the court probably at least 50% of the time will appoint an outsider. Usually somebody who is a professional referee at this kind of thing. I was asked once if I wanted to do that. I said, thank you, no.
How do we approach the lawyers in getting some probate business?
Well, probably the best thing to do is go down to the Superior Court and look at the calendar and see what the probate calendar has to say, and go up and say, here I am. We're a big outfit. We're the largest, fastest growing Coldwell Banker operation in Southern California. We have 5 offices. And if you've got properties in several counties, I'll handle Riverside and San Bernardino, and my colleagues in Santa Ana will handle Orange, and we've got 2 offices in Los Angeles. We'll do that for you.
How far in LA will you go?
As far as I have to.
I know that's right.
You know, I've been in this business 30 years, 30 years tomorrow.
Yeah.
30 years, no, 30 years day after tomorrow.
Okay.
And I made my living during the 90s when we were in that terrible crash, doing broker price opinions. And because I was born and raised here and knew the city well, I would take them anywhere that the banks would send them. Crazy old honky in a red shirt driving a old white Cadillac driving down through South Central doing broker price opinions.
Oh, wow, good for you.
Well, it was kind of interesting because it was after '92 and the riots and so on.
Yeah.
I never had a moment's trouble. I've never had any trouble around Los Angeles at all.
Yeah.
But I did broker price opinions everywhere.
Yeah.
And so you can say, you could follow the commissioner's regulations. I never did anything east of here. I did a lot southwest, and I did some north in the back. But you can say honestly that you comply with the commissioner's regulations because you or your broker, or in this case, an associate broker who is your training broker, knows pretty much everything west of here. Because I do. I know, where the swamps are and the rest of it. So you will fulfill the obligation to have either a partner who knows what's going on or a broker who knows what's going on in the areas that you want to go into.
Yeah.
Probably what you want to do in a situation like this is, if I were from here, I would not list in West Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Not because couldn't figure it out or get some
Good
help,
service.
but it's too far, I
Yeah.
can't do a decent job for the seller and so on.
Right,
That's why we do referrals.
right.
We do referrals 2 counties away, just, to be sure it all works well.
Well, that's why I was asking, by you being in Claremont, would you go to San Pedro or
Yes, of
Santa
course.
Monica?
I'll go any place where I'm in the area where I did a broker price opinion.
Oh,
And I'm born and raised here,
okay.
79 years, a long time, you get accustomed to the place. I remember riding for the first time on the Pasadena Freeway, which was called the Arroyo Parkway,
Yeah,
and I was 6 years old.
yeah,
That's the first one there ever was.
yeah.
So, do you know it? Are you familiar with it? Can you do it justice to the client? And in this case, if you go to that court, you can give them a real, maybe they only have one small house in Riverside, but you're the guy. One small house in Marina Bay, you're the guy. But, oh geez, we have a duplex over in Pasadena, great. We're the guys. And right now, the last generation that didn't believe in trusts is coming up to the grave. If you think about trusts, and we've talked about this before, and it's important to digress here because, people are dying who never died before, and you better know how to handle it. And I think that the thing that we don't recognize is that my generation grew up with the expectation that with luck, we'd have a car, and maybe a fixed pension until we died, and a house, because we'd pay the house off. Then along came the generation that is just ahead of me, the greatest generation, the one that fought in the war. I survived World War II at the age of 12. Didn't make it, but these people came along and they created wealth like nobody had ever seen anywhere in the world before, as a group. People were living in 1950 and 60 in California the way kings of the century before had never even thought of living. And those people accumulated wealth and they passed it on to the boomer generation. Now, my generation is coming to an end. Most of the time that I have been alive, my generation was largely not born in California. And so the people who are coming, people who are, come from a mindset of small house in an Iowa town and this kind of thing. Most of the people in my generation you'll find have wills. People even half a generation behind, people who are 15 years, 10 years, my junior, have trusts. But you need to know how to do this. Because one, if there's no trust and there's no will, the court will create a probate and somebody's going to list that. So, look at all the things that you do in the ordinary way of listing a property and then do them. Be mindful of the fact that there's an enormous burden on you. Of all the exemptions, REO, probate, trust, the greatest number of exemptions and the greatest amount of protection exist in probate for 2 reasons. One is the court expects a novice, a non-professional to be executing or administering it. They expect it to be a family member who doesn't really understand all this. And the court wants to maximize the estate, and so you have to have a real thinking cap on when you do your inspection. It probably is almost worth it if you have a good home inspector, I would say. Don't bother with the contractor. A good home inspector in your pocket to say, look, Charlie, I won't pay you your full fee, but for $75, will you come and tell me what the hell's wrong with this house? Because It's a probate, and they're not gonna tell me anything. Probably cheap. Okay, page 2. Broker and seller's duties, exactly the same. Agency relationship, absolutely. Key safe, lockbox, all of those things. You remember that they don't have to authorize you to do it. They don't have to authorize you to do a sign. No sign, no key safe. One step more and they'll say, well, we don't want it in the multiple listing service. Why would you want the listing?
Yeah.
Just bear it in mind. There is a probate advisory, and you will notice in paragraph 13, it's already checked. It is automatic, it is in there.
Okay.
It has to be, it is part of the whole thing. Now, this is the one where we discussed before, that they're exempt from the transfer disclosure statement, Melrose, and the natural hazard disclosure. On the other hand, the requirements are that hazard zones be disclosed. Hazard zones, by an odd coincidence, correspond exactly with the 6 natural hazard disclosure questions. I've yet to find a probate, an attorney, anybody doing a probate who would not buy a natural hazard disclosure. They must strap the water heaters, but they do not have to put in smoke detectors. Is that a burden on you? I think so.
Carbon monoxide too, huh?
Well, we don't know about carbon monoxide. It says it's not exempt from carbon monoxide, but we have no place where they have to certify it. Yeah, there's no form for that. Yeah, it has to be there,
Yeah, okay.
but no smoke detectors. Now, if you go into a 70-year-old house and mom and dad lived there for 50 years, there is at least some chance you won't find smoke detectors. We go in, I'll tell you the thing that terrifies me. We go into old triplexes and quads, and there are 4 places there, and the water heaters are not strapped, and there's no smoke detector. When dad died, nobody took any maintenance, and mom just collected the rent, and now she's dead, and don't let a transaction close, 1 to 4 units, without the smoke detectors. $7 a piece, I'll come and install them for you, just get them in there, get them in there. Carbon monoxide device is a requirement. Other considered death, if the property is being sold under the authority of the probate code because of the death of an owner of the property, and if the buyer is concerns about the manner, location, or details of the death, then the buyer should direct any specific questions to the executor or the administrator. Now, the executor administrator is exempt from the SPQ, the Seller Property Questionnaire. Again, if you ask them, you will find that the majority who are family members on a trust, on a probate, will complete it as best they know. They're under no obligation to do so, and you certainly can't force them to do so. Somebody have to love me till the end. If it's not somebody who's on my database, it isn't an agent. Well, we're roaring along here at a pretty good pace. If you know that the death occurred on property, must disclose it. Don't ever equivocate on that. Death is terribly important to many people besides Asians, for whom it is particularly important. There are certain Buddhist concerns about death, and that is a religious issue. But you find good old white Protestant North Europeans who don't want to live in a house where somebody died. Now, how you get to having an inventory with the average age of 50 years and nobody died there, I don't know. That's, the statutory requirement is 3 years. But if you know, you must tell. And when we get to the other section, which is the purchase contract section, we talk about the probate purchase contract. We'll talk about this business of going to court and overbidding and so on. Something I would suggest to you that we mentioned when we were talking about trusts, and it is this. Increasingly, there's no There's no test case on it, but increasingly the courts, just like they're asking us for an avid, which is not required. They don't want to see 3 lines in paragraph 3 of the TDS. They want an avid, they want to see what you saw. So they are saying, well, yeah, you don't have to do a TDS, but you lived 2 blocks away. And for the last 5 years, you're the one that's called the plumber every time, and you paid the bills. And you had the house re-roofed, and maybe there is something that you as an individual, even though the probate protects the estate, do you as an individual know something that you should be disclosing? Because you are a participant, and you have a duty under the general statute to disclose what you know. And I tell every agent who says I'm going on a probate or I'm going on a trust, be sure you stress this point. We have a duty, and you'll hear me say it again and again, we have a duty as a counselor and an advisor to tell these people what we know and what we think, what we feel might be just over the hill. How long is it going to be before the oldest daughter, who never left home and lived there throughout her whole 43 years, and who is the executor, is not going to be called upon to say, the probate exempts the estate, but the statute does not exempt you because you knew, and it's germane, and you paid all the bills for the last 10 years. I think that'll come. We're finding more and more areas where the buyer will have recourse for people who just simply didn't say what they knew. Let's not be one of them. Whatever you find out, put down. If the executor says, well, the roof is pretty good, I had it put on 5 years ago. Say, do you have receipts so we can show that to a buyer, be very happy? That's a wonderful protection. 5-year-old roof ought to still be under a guarantee. If she said, it's really a pity, but you know, we have to have Roto-Rooter out here probably every 4 months in the avid. Anecdotal information indicates that the sewer line must be cleaned every 4 months. Is it okay to put that? Is it okay not to? She told you and you know. You have a duty because you know.
Yeah.
You have to. And those kinds of things, again, you're building some level of protection for the seller, obviously, for the buyer especially, and for yourself. Buyers intend to exchange, a 1031 exchange. How many of you have heard of a 1031 exchange? Always wondered what it was about. Huh?
I never,
Okay.
yeah.
A 1031 exchange is the government playing let's pretend.
Yeah,
Back in the 1970s, a guy named Starker,
yeah.
here in California, he had a house, he bought it for, $40,000 or something, and he lived in it for 5 or 6 years, and his family was growing. And he thought, I can just manage a down payment on another house, I'm gonna keep this and rent it out. Well, maybe I don't wanna do that. Maybe, well, all right, I will. So he kept it 5 years and then he sold it. I'm gonna move this into a bigger place. I've lived 5 years in my own house. Excuse me, I don't know who this is saying. This is Norm. Yes? No, I'm teaching a class.
Okay.
Yes.
That's good.
I'll be finished at 3:30. You want me to call you when I'm finished? Okay.
Oh, yes, I can't find stuff like that also.
Lost my place.
1031 exchange.
1031
Yeah,
exchange,
and
okay.
the guy with the little house, and he kept it for 5 years.
Starker. Kept it 5 years and he sold it. He sold it at a profit.
Mhm.
And he took all the money and he bought another house. And they came along, and in those days, capital gain tax was 30%. Well, he sold his house for about almost 100% more than he paid for it, because he'd lived in it for a long time. And so he paid 15% of the selling price to the government. And he got to thinking, and I don't know whether he had a good attorney or it was just a gamble or what, but he filed a suit in the United States Tax Court. Now, that's one place you don't want to be, is the US Tax Court, and you certainly don't want to be there voluntarily. But he filed suit against the United States Internal Revenue Service in the tax court. And he said, this is ridiculous. I gained nothing from that. I didn't put money in my pocket. I didn't take a trip to Bermuda. All I did was take that money and reinvest it in my community. All of it. To enhance my family, to enhance the community. Somebody bought that house and that enhanced their lives. I think it is ridiculous for you to charge me taxes, because when I go to sell this and buy a triplex, you're going to tax me again, and it's the same money. And I'm not touching it. And the tax court sat for about 5 weeks on that thing and finally came back and said, we think he's right. IRS, go and figure out a way to make this work. And Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code is why this is called a 1031 exchange. When I was first in the business, it was called a Starker exchange, because Starker done it. And what it says is this: if you follow certain rules, you can start out with your first piece of property that's an income property. It has to be a true income property. And you can parlay that up as high as you like and never pay taxes until either you sell it off at the end because you're sick and tired of being a landlord, or you die and it becomes an estate issue. But you have to follow the rules. You can do it as many times as you want to, there's no limitation, but the property must sell for less than the property you're buying. The encumbrance that you leave behind must be less than the encumbrance you pick up. In other words, if you have a $50,000 trust deed on the house you sell, you better have a $51,000 trust deed on the house that you buy. You must enter into the escrow for the purchased house no later than 45 days from the close of escrow on the house that was sold. You must close that escrow within 180 days of opening escrow. Of the close of the escrow on the prior house. Those are pretty simple rules, and they're fairly easily followed until you come right down to getting it done, and then it can be just absolutely miserable. The reason it's a game of let's pretend is this. If I own a house free and clear, and I sell it for twice what I made on it, or twice what I paid for it. I bought it 20 years ago, I now sell it for twice. I take all the money out and I go over and I buy a house that's $1 more than what I sold for. Everybody nods and smiles, everybody's happy. We close escrow, I can go right down to the bank tomorrow and borrow whatever the bank will lend on it. So I get my money out, and then I start building up equity again. The other thing that is kind of strange is that we pretend we're not buying and selling one house or not selling one house and buying another. We pretend we're swapping it. Everything in these two forms, buyer's intent to engage, seller's intent to engage, all is predicated on the notion that we will pretend that the buyer is giving the seller his house, while the seller is giving the buyer her house, and everybody will go away happy. And we do this by the means of an intermediary, an accommodator. One of the things, the final rule that you must not violate is that when escrow closes on a house, on house number 1, the seller of that house never touches it. It stays with an accommodator. Can't stay with escrow, because as soon as escrow closes, that money belongs to the seller. So the seller instructs escrow to move the money to an accommodator who pretends that the house that is being bought is being traded. And there's a bundle of paper, and it doesn't cost anybody anything except the seller will pay about $700 to have the money accommodated and the paperwork shuffled. And in the end, we've pretended that we've traded.
I think that's why it just never has been clear to me how I work, because there's so much pretense in it.
But it is, it's utter pretense. Complete and utter pretense.
Yeah, now, the accommodator, is that a realtor, a
No,
lawyer?
No,
or
there are
someone that
accommodation
actually-
companies. If you deal with that, I have a particularly good accommodator. I've dealt with him now for 20 years. He'll come out and give lectures here if you want. But the thing I like about him is he's inexpensive, his attorney is on staff, and you have a 1031 question, you pick up the phone, you call Phil and say, Phil, I don't know what I'm talking about. You talk to this guy, and you
Yeah.
talk with your client.
Okay.
Take 10 minutes, take 2 hours. And he's never put a foot wrong. It's a little company, I can't even remember the name of it. He was in the title business before, he's been doing this about 20 years now. And it's not, it's no big deal when you're exchanging a $170,000 house for a $250,000 house.
Yeah.
You get some of these people up in their third and fourth switches, and they're getting rid of a 15-unit or 14-unit apartment and going to 35 units. Yeah. And the nice part about it is, when they go to sell, they remember you if you did a good job. Oh yeah, you really knew the 1031 business. And yeah, I remember the guy you worked the exchange with. It didn't cost anything, we just had to sign a few extra papers. Well, we're ready to sell, will you find a place so we can, well, that's the big trick.
Wow.
You want a place that they can open escrow on in 45 days. It's possible to do a reverse 1031, in other words, buy the place first and sell the one after. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that, that is messy. So the whole object of the, pardon?
I had one experience about 10 years ago.
Reverse?
Yes.
No, they're miserable. They're miserable. It's not, it's a blinding amount of paperwork to do it forward. But that's really all there is. You sell and you list, and all you do is just tell them, we're gonna do something a little bit different here. This document describes the procedure.
With the fall of real estate and so forth, is this very prevalent now, because
It's
people
getting to be.
bought, okay,
It's getting more so. Anybody who bought a house in 2005,
okay,
an income property. If he isn't short selling it, if he's selling it at all, he's selling it at a loss. Somebody who bought a house in 1985, and now figures the market's at about bottom, he'll get as much as he can out of his place, and he's saved some money because he's had somebody paying off his low mortgage over all these years. And he will go out and buy something pretty good, but he still has to move that property to make an exchange.
because if I understood what you said, the sale of the original house as well as the encumbrance on it has to be lower than the new one, right?
That's right.
Okay.
But if you wanna move up, I mean, if you have a duplex and you now have the money in the bank and there is some equity in the house you bought 25 years ago, to move to 5 units, why not?
Mhm.
The other thing about, and this is a tax issue and something you don't get involved in, but after a period of time, the write-down, the write-off, if you will, for commercial property dwindles. You don't want to do it anymore on that property, you need to go to the new one. You need to talk to the tax person about that.
Right, right.
There are two problems with a 1031. One is, not always can the seller find a place that he wants to buy. And in the case of the buyer, not only can the buyer not get a buyer, they may find that the seller doesn't understand what's going on. And there's always this kind of, so sometimes both sides have difficulty making the first leg. And so for that reason, there's a provision in here under paragraph C, it's the only one that really matters here. The close of escrow, paragraph C, if buyer is unable through no fault of buyers, and then the next one is if the seller is able through no fault of seller, to complete the transfer of such other property by the close of escrow in the agreement or as extended by mutual agreement, and then you generally want to check the box that says the close of escrow in this transaction will be extended by a maximum of 45 days. But the whole business of 1031, the whole business of trying to get properties is very important. And they don't mean 46 days, oops, they mean 45 days.
It has to be 45 days?
45 days, open the escrow. There are several other provisions.
Can it be 60 days?
45 days. If you go 46 days, you have lost your relief from taxes. It is just an ordinary sale. There is a provision in the code that says you may select 3 properties, up to 3 properties. If the first one fails, you may go to the other, you may go to the second. If the second one fails, you may go to the third, but you must designate them at the beginning. And if you go to the third, you still have to open it in 45 days.
What if it's no longer available? Oh, well.
You pays your money, you takes your choice. Very seldom does the buyer's, the seller's side fail, because most of the time, people buying what they want are gonna live in the house.
Mhm.
So that's not a problem. The buyer's side, the buyer wanting to engage in a 1031 exchange with the average seller, doesn't have any difficulty because it can be explained. But as you move up the chain, as you move to the duplex or the five units, you get into issues like condition and city ordinances and things that are not up to date and so on. So you have to do a lot of due diligence, and you have to do it fast.
Seems very involved.
No, it's not. It's due diligence. It's due diligence with a fair stake in the outcome.
Okay.
The 3 properties should not be so widely different that you can't use the same group of people to examine. You go in and you look at the first 5 units and they're okay, except you better have something like that fairly close where you can transfer this team of inspectors and so on right over there and take a look at number 2. You also want to be working with an escrow holder that has done 1031 exchanges. Because if the escrow holder writes the wrong date, oh, well, it's Friday, I'll do it Monday. Out. Because how do you get your exemption at tax time?
Yes.
You show the escrow. What you want to do is get into escrow as rapidly as you can to try and get as many things on your out of the way as you can.
Yes.
And if your seller is the one that wants to do a 1031 exchange, you should probably, you and she should be looking for more properties, maybe even before you put it on the market. Because she may look around and say, well, yeah, this great property was 40 miles away and I manage all my own stuff. Let's get something nearer home. Maybe I'll have to wait and buy something more expensive, or maybe I'll just have to get something different. There's a lot of planning in it and a fair amount of running around. Because I think we would be derelict if we didn't give our buyer the option of 3. Now, we have to find those 3, and they have to be viable.
And, so like I own a duplex down in LA, I live on one side, rent out the other side, but now I wanna move up to 4 units. Do I have to live in that 4 unit?
You're better off if you
Yeah.
don't live in the 4 units,
Really?
because, well, when you sell the one down in downtown LA,
Uh-huh.
only 50% of the value of the property is protected.
Okay, right, because I live here, right.
If you live in, if you have 3 separate lots with 3 separate houses and you live in one, 2 of those can be 1031, the other is your personal residence.
Right.
Now, if you have a big increase in value, you have the advantages of the $250,000 forgiveness for capital gain. But that doesn't apply to the one that's the rental. You sell it and you have to shield half the money. Now, you can use the other money if you want to, but if you're gonna do a 1031, you have to find something that you can buy for the value of 50% of the duplex.
Wow, I see.
There are some people who do only 1031s and make a good living. I know a couple who lived their entire real estate life for 30 years and retired doing nothing but selling, listing and selling mobile homes. So you can specialize and make a go. And that was when a mobile home, a good mobile home, cost about $45,000. Double wide, big, expensive. Okay. Well, 1031 sounds mighty onerous, but you get into an area of apartment buildings, or you get into an area where you have these small, sort of 30s, 40s quadruplexes, and you can make a good living doing it. It's not that tough, and you can get a lot of help from the accommodators.
Very good.
Any questions about the 1031? Any questions about this form? Because this is the only thing in addition to the listing or the purchase contract that you need. Remember, always the non-exchanger really wants this thing to close, so you have to be pretty rigid in the language that you use, because they don't wanna hang around, and they don't want the guy blowing it out because he couldn't find the house, or because somebody didn't buy his. So you need to be a good sales type.
Yeah, I've kind of
Make up stories.
shied away from the 1031 during my span here.
Don't.
Yeah, because I
I'll-
just didn't feel
I'll-
intelligent.
I'll always hold hands with you.
Yeah.
It has to do more with just plain bone-wearying dog work out in the field finding things than it does with intelligence. It's very straightforward. You're gonna sell a house, you're gonna buy a house, let's call it a house. You're gonna sell a house, and you're gonna buy a duplex.
Okay,
And you're just gonna hold hands in a different way.
okay.
I had a very pleasant experience with that one transaction at that time, and the accommodator, like you say, was very helpful. Really helped me through the whole thing.
Well, they're like, almost like specialized escrow.
Yes,
In a way, because, and if you don't like them, or if they screw up, you're never coming back. And the only place they get money is from real estate agents, because, you know, I wanna sell my house, I've never done it, I've never done a 1031, I don't know what an accommodator is. Well, maybe I get up there when I'm moving from 5 to 15 or something, oh yeah, we'll use Phil. I want that accommodator, or I want that escrow. Be sure, don't be parochial, don't give it to your escrow company just because it's your escrow company. Get somebody who's done a 1031. It's a lot of moving parts. They're simple, and they're very logical. The whole game is illogical, but, you know, the notion that you can't take any money out of selling property A, but you can go over here as soon as property B closes and borrow the limit. What's wrong with this picture? Think of it as your tax dollars at work. Modification of terms. Believe it or not, this form has only come into existence in the last 10 years, maybe a little less. Always before, when we were gonna change the terms on a listing agreement, we'd get out the addendum and we'd have to think of, you know, well, price is going to be. Listing period is extended to. Property will be off the market during the Christmas season. All of these things, and we just type them out and get them signed. And here's one that's specific. We are modifying your agreement, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. This is what we expect you to do. You're going to sign this, and then we will do what we're supposed to. Don't do it on spec. Don't, just because they're good buds, don't they'll say, look, you better lower the price because, you know, we want it lowered for the weekend because there's just no way in the world it's gonna go at this price. And by the way, we're in Vegas right now, we'll sign it on Monday when we come back, and you lower the price and come back on Monday, and they're outraged because you lowered the price. Because the offer that came in is for more than the price that you lowered it to, and now you can't make that stick, and if it ain't in writing, it ain't real estate. No writing, no real estate, get them to sign. And you can put anything in here that modifies the listing agreement. Now, one of the things that this is very seldom used for is modifying an acquisition. Most of you don't use a buyer-broker contract, most of you probably never will, and I don't even include it in this because it's like talking to the walls. But if you have a buyer-broker contract and you want to modify it, you use this form
Hmm.
to acquire property or to rent. Anyway, use this form, the date, be specific about dates, don't say 90 days or something, a specific date. Put any other remarks in here. If they're lowering it to 352,500 from 365, and you thought it ought to be between 320 and 340 to begin with, or 310 and 340 to begin with, put that in here. At date of price reduction, agent's opinion of price was 320 to 340.
Or they're lowering the price, but now they're gonna take some personal item that they were gonna leave.
Yeah, you can do that, by all means, you can do that, you can always do that,
Put
but
it in here.
it doesn't really mean anything, but yeah, you
Okay,
can do
put
that.
it in.
Because maybe they'll put it back in if they think it's gonna help them get a buyer. Okay, cancellation of listings. This again is a form that came along very late. We used to do it with a regular addendum. Don't ask why, I don't know. They're kind of strange. All of our experience is that if you can have a specialized form, it makes a difference. It tends to focus so nobody misses anything. If you read the listing agreement carefully, you will see that if they cancel for any reason, you're entitled to commission. Yeah. Wonderful PR. Look, lady, I know your husband died, and I know you want to cancel and go on living here, but you owe us $11,400. Gonna do that? I think not. And so we have worked out here a series of options that seem to work very well. Pay the broker the amount of compensation specified. I've never seen that done. I suppose it could be. Principal agrees to pay broker blank percent of the compensation specified in the listing. If prior to the end of the specified listing period or extension, the principal enters into a listing agreement with somebody else. Okay, we're gonna cancel the listing, and if I list with Remax between now and the time the listing would have expired, I'll give you 1%. I don't like you, I like Remax, but you've worked hard. I've never seen that work either. Principal agrees to notify the other real estate broker of the compensation obligations, that's obvious. If checked, principal agrees to pay the broker $400. Do people have legitimate reasons for wanting to get out of a listing?
Some,
I hope to tell you. Think about it. The job fell through in Massachusetts, we can't go, we're not gonna play, you know. Are you gonna demand the commission? I don't think so. Well, you know, we were selling this to buy the house with the granny flat and back, and even though she's only 64, Granny died last night, and we just don't wanna sell the house. I think these are all real reasons. Do you have real expenses involved? Yeah. You say, okay, that's fine, we're not gonna enforce any of this, look, we have all these rules. We'll give you an unconditional cancellation, but we have expenses, I have expenses, my broker has expenses. Pay us $400 and let us cancel it. In my 3 offices, you get 200, we get 200, and we go our separate ways. People are very happy to do that.
Now, how do you get the money? I mean, they just go and give you a check?
Give a
straight
check
up,
made out to
payable
Coldwell Banker Pioneer.
Yeah.
Now, the one you will do most often is that the principal owes no compensation to the buyer.
That's fine.
And why will you do that? Because you're the one that wants to get out.
Yeah.
Or there was a death in the family or something like that. You ever have a listing you wanted to get out of? Couldn't stand it? It happens. It happens. I have spent almost all of my career managing. I list and sell, well, I don't sell, I don't represent buyers at all. I will list an old friend's house. But during my listing and selling days, which lasted, first 15 years, I had listings I just wasn't comfortable dealing with the people. They were dishonest, or they were sneaky. or they were just slobs, they'd leave a place looking like a pigsty. And there were days I really wanted to get out of the listing. I never did, but there are times when you're just spending too much time, effort, and energy. Another one that you probably need to think about getting out of is when they say it's worth $465 and you think it might top 400, and they finally bring it down to 425 when the market has fallen down to 380. Why would you stick with that? No moron's gonna come along and offer a price like that, and you're gonna be beaten to death, and they're gonna hate you anyway.
Now, what I had done in that case when I was selling, in LA years ago, at that time there was equity, and they wanted a bottom dollar amount, bottom line amount. And we would get that, try to hash that out initially during the listing process, because if I'm gonna list it high just to get the listing, there's no point in me taking it,
That's
if I
right.
know it's gonna sit
That's
there,
right.
Yeah, and you're not gonna bend at all.
Right,
you know?
and in those days, there was a lot less information available to a buyer to say that it wasn't worth it. And matter of fact, until 1988, you couldn't tell a buyer that you could get it for less. You were the sub-agent of the seller, we had that discussion. And the point that we now make is that everybody gets a complete set of comps, and we give a range, and of course, the seller interprets it on the high side, and the
Always.
buyer interprets it on the bottom side.
Of course.
And that's where you try and meet in the middle, that's what we do. If the buyer doesn't even start out with a sensible price, or I have one of my better agents in Claremont has somebody who insists on looking at 400,000 plus houses, and the maximum she's qualified for and can finance and pay everything is 370, including closing costs and everything else. And finally, Christie said, "What do I do?" I said, "Tell her not to slam the door on the way out."
Okay. That's a trigger word, yeah.
Because
It's a waste of money.
this document really comes into play when there are legitimate reasons for it. If you want out, or if somebody dies, if there's a real hardship, don't charge them anything. But if they're a go-get-em family and they had a job transfer that fell through, or they changed their mind, we changed our mind, is that legitimate? Yeah, I don't want to move from this house, I love this house. Well, look, I understand that. We'll in effect tear up the contract, you just pay us $400 for our expenses, we'll go away, and that's it.